lost, there's no way back. No way at all, no way at all.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me again for another deconstruction video. In this one, we're going to deconstruct DJ Shadow's song, What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 2, from his 1997 album, Preemptive Strike. But before I do that, I want to take a minute here and explain why I think sampling is something special and musically important. I often hear people say, isn't sampling just ripping off other people's music? Isn't playing a real instrument much more impressive? And to that I say, I love playing and recording real instruments. I've built a career around playing the piano and the drums and guitar. But when I hear a good producer who knows what they're doing and has respect for the source material, when I hear that producer take one sample and another sample and put these things together and create something new in a very creative and interesting way, to me that is just as impressive as a musician playing their instrument well. Let me be clear about this though. There are some bad practices that certain producers use when sampling other people's music that I don't necessarily agree with. One of those things would be to hear a sample and to re-record it, maybe changing a note or two, in order to avoid paying the artist or the owner of that song a clearance fee. To me, this is sort of creatively lazy and cheap, especially if the producer is somebody who is going to be making actual money off of their music. And that isn't to say that you can't build off an idea that another artist has had, or that all of us as artists aren't standing on the shoulders of the creatives and the artistic people that came before us, because of course we all are. But it's more a matter of not directly ripping off somebody else and then not giving credit or respect to the person you're ripping off. Because obviously to me, I don't think that that's very cool. So, in order to recognize why sampling is musically important, it's necessary to understand that some of the first hardware samplers, like the Akai MPC series of samplers that DJ Shadow used and Jay Dilla used, and so many other phenomenally creative producers used back in the 90s, you have to understand that those pieces of hardware and software really paved the way for what the modern DAW is. And by DAW, I mean the digital audio workstation that you see here on your screen, which in this case is Ableton Live. So without this technology that was developed in the early samplers, musicians like me wouldn't be able to resample our own drums and our own piano and guitars to make new and interesting compositions. And I will demonstrate later in this video how DJ Shadow resampled the drums that he used for What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 2, and the way that he manipulated those sounds on his MPC 60, on his early sampler, to make the very interesting and unique sounding drums that he has in this song. There is another reason I think sampling, when done well, deserves respect. To demonstrate that, we're going to have to take a listen to the intro of the band Debb Johnson's 1969 song, When the Time Is Right. Okay, so I'm not trying to talk down about anybody else's musical creations, but what part of that song stood out to you? Was it the crazy guitar solo that happened after the intro? Was it the drums or the vocals or the bass? Of course, it's none of those. It's the intro. And it's just so sad to me that this is a common occurrence, even in this day and age, where a composer orchestrates something like that intro with those horns and those flutes. And it's just so beautifully orchestrated and recorded and produced. But because of the pressures of the music industry to create a hit, you couldn't make an entire song out of that. You should be able to, but you can't. So whoever wrote that intro couldn't make a song out of it. They had to go into this, whatever was popular at the time, which was obviously this psych rock. And I'm sure the label was asking for a hit, and this was one of their attempts at that. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you sample something, you can take this piece of musical gold that otherwise would be lost and completely forgotten, and you can give it new life. And that's what DJ Shadow does here. He uses that intro because it's so beautiful and it's so pretty and it deserves to be heard. And he takes samples like that and he expands on them and he builds songs around them. In this case, he uses that sample as an intro to this song, but it really sets the scene for the rest of the song. So hopefully that clears up why I believe sampling is an important musical expression and deserves respect when it's done by somebody who knows what they're doing and does it with a lot of care. So let's move on and let's listen to DJ Shadow's What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 2 from his album Preemptive Strike.
Cold.
Our road was paved to the edge of town.
In a few moments, you will have an experience which will seem completely real. It will be the result of your subconscious fears transformed to your conscious awareness. You have 5 seconds to terminate this tape. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Got to lose. And once you've lost, there's no way back. No way at all, no way at all.
How cool is that? So let's talk about the samples themselves. There are 2 main elements in this song, the drums and the guitar. I'm going to start with the guitar. It comes from the band Forienger and their 1981 song, Girl on the Moon. Let's take a listen to it. So to me, this is one of the reasons why DJ Shadow is such a special producer. He is so skilled at finding this sort of stoic melancholy in the music that he makes and the samples that he finds. It's almost like this calm, relaxed, existential dread that he has in his tracks, at least the tracks that I kind of vibe with. And in this case, you have this clean guitar with chorus on it. I mean, I wouldn't hear that and go, I can sample that and make something out of it. But he did. Now, I think one of the things that DJ Shadow likely does is he probably samples a lot of things and pitch shifts them to see if there's anything special there. And in this case, what he would have done is sampled the first guitar loop. So that loop right there. So we're going to copy that and we're going to paste it into a new track. And so what we have here in the yellow is our guitar. And if you have your clip on repitch, when you transpose it up or down semitones, you're basically changing the key of it. So if we start out like this, let's lower it 1 semitone. And I think it sounds great. I think it sounds better even already. Let's keep going though. I don't like that key as much personally. And so I think this is what he would have done. But what he ended up doing was pitch shifting it down around 8 semitones. To go from this, which is, you know, kind of jumpy and kind of happy, obviously in a minor key, but kind of happy, to this, which is just so brooding and so wonderful. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. When you have a really good producer who knows what they're doing, they can make something new and fresh out of it. And to me, this is a good example of this with this guitar. So let's move on to the drums. I think the drums are probably the most impressive part of this song, to be totally honest with you. The way that he cut up these samples is very cool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna listen to the beginning of this song, and I want you to try to pick out where you think he got these drum samples from. So just to refresh your memory, I'm gonna quick replay where the drums come in What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 2. And see if you can pick out where these drums came from. So this song is the 1976 song Shelly's Blues by Louis Bellson, Shelly, Manne, Willie, Bobo, and Paul Humphrey. Now, one of the methods that he uses is he will detune it by around 4 to 5 semitones. And so you end up with a sound like this. Here's what it sounds like normally. But it gives it more bass. The cymbals themselves, the high is turned down, the bass drum gets bassier. So I'm going to show you what I did here. I've already put these pieces together. I've already built this beat. Now there's a few elements. Consistently through this beat, there is a brush going on behind, going almost sounds like a shaker.
And the guy who runs it figures the averages all day long and all night.
So that was the first element that I took care of. So these parts, you can hear the brush. Now the thing is because he hit a cymbal, this drummer hit a cymbal, so there's a cymbal bleed that happens throughout the next number of drum hits here, which almost make those parts unusable from a sampling perspective. So you almost have to wait for the cymbal to die down before you can take a sample. And I'll show you why here in a second. So that makes, to me, these last two brush hits on the snare the ones to use. Do you hear that? So I don't hear any cymbal in there. But if I go back to these brush hits, you'll hear cymbal. And so that's how I know that DJ Shadow took this part, because there isn't that bleed of the cymbal in there. And that actually goes for, you know, bass drum hits and snare hits. Sometimes you can get interesting sounds if the bleed sounds cool, but for the most part, yeah, you want to avoid, if you're sampling from something, you want to avoid cymbal bleed. Let's move on to the snare. So I'm going to show you where this snare comes from. Again, what I'm looking for is a snare hit where there isn't cymbal bleed. So like that snare right there, I can't use it because the cymbal bleed is still happening. Same thing with that bass drum and hi-hat. So any useful snare sample is going to be after that cymbal bleed. But that's the snare sample that I used. And same goes for the bass drum. So I pushed up the EQ about 8 dB at around 3500 hertz to kind of match the hollowness of his bass drum. Because it has this bassy quality from being detuned down, you know? So let's take a listen to the drums here. So I'll also add the guitar that I sampled here so you can hear what it all sounds like together. So if you haven't seen my video where I deconstruct DJ Shadow's Midnight in a Perfect World, I'll have it up here above me. Check it out after this video. But he does the same sort of trick, the same sampling trick, where he lets the samples themselves kind of bleed out and bleed in. And by that, I mean they fade in a little bit. Not every single sample, but some of them do. So like, for example, here's the... there's a bit of the snare bleed after that hit. And as well with the bass drum, there's some bass drums where you want the bleed from before to come in. Same thing with the snare here. See how there's like an expanse before the attack of the snare hit. And it makes the sample and the drum beat kind of breathe a little bit. So when he's resampling things, it makes it sound a little bit more natural when you let the sample fade out and fade in. Both things. It's actually really important. And so that is one of the tricks that he did here. So thanks so much for checking out this deconstruction of DJ Shadow's What Does Your Soul Look Like Part 2 from his 1997 album Preemptive Strike. If you have any thoughts about why sampling is either good or bad, feel free to comment below. I like a good discussion. And if you like this video, consider giving a thumbs up and subscribing. I would also like to ask you to share this video with any friends that you might think would like this sort of content. Maybe you know somebody who's getting into music production, or you know somebody who likes sampling or DJ Shadow or any of this stuff. I would appreciate anyone helping me spread the word about this channel. And on that note, I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.